No.
Only the one meeting in 2012
Right.
was via email. The rest of the meetings were in person.
In person. And we have representation from all over the state. So if they fly in from the southern part of the state or wherever they have to come, that's what has happened.
Let me just read from our report on page 20.
Okay.
Because this is the information we're functioning from here. It is unfortunate that BRN's workforce advisory committees, either separately or together, are not convening more frequently to provide timely advice, because it is unclear how BRN is benefiting from the volumes of education and workforce reports it generates. For example, in the prior sunset, it was suggested the committees devise strategies to address the lack of African American and Latino men in the nursing profession. 4 years later, the problem persists. And when asked if the board was pursuing any initiatives to increase African American and Latino men in the workforce, BRN responded, no. So that's why we have these questions. We have the midwifery one on top of it, which hasn't met since 2011. But this is what is in the Sunset Report that we're trying to get an answer to. And that is if you're not using the structure, if it is not valued, or if the impression that everyone's getting is that there really isn't any value, because we're either not meeting or we're doing it by email or, it's once a year, then we have a problem. We have a problem because there's not an effective channel to the BRN to get things changed, to get things moved, to get things done. And it's important if you have a structure that you're actually using it.
Yeah, but we will go ahead and we will have that meeting for that special meeting for the nurse midwives.
Well, I don't think the goal is to have one meeting for the special meeting for them. It's to conduct the meetings on a normal, regular basis so that their issues and their concerns that come up in the future are allowed to be addressed by the committee and then move forward and some regress if they have some issues that are raised. So it's not one meeting, it's a continuation of the meetings of the committees that have been established by the board.
Yeah, because our other meetings, we meet 5 times a year. All the other committees meet, the nurse practice committee, the legislative committee, all those committee meetings. We meet 5 times in a year, and the practice committee also.
Could I follow up on the question that Chair Bonilla raised in the answer of, in terms of increasing African American and Latino men in the workforce for the BRN, and the simple response was no?
I'm here.
At this time.
I'm African American. I'm here.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's fine. But we're talking about in the profession more so, and trying to encourage more and getting out in the workforce to create opportunities outside of just the board. I think it's wonderful that you're on the board.
So I work as a faculty also, and this is another way that outreach is being done. And I still function as a staff nurse in the emergency department. And this is another way that outreach is done by serving the communities. And serving the communities, if they see me working there, people from those areas, you reach out to them and you try to foster them into the programs. Being involved in other organizations such as the Black Nursing Association and National Black Nursing Association, we do outreach.
I think what we're looking for is a strategic plan in place that can look towards the workforce. I appreciate your efforts in the workplace, trying to encourage more
sitting in this position too. I hope it's an influence on my African American community.
I'm sure it is, but I guess what we're looking for is some strategic plan, some way that the board can outreach to the greater and larger community. Certainly where you work, it is probably a great influence, but we're talking about elsewhere in the state where it may not be, and people won't recognize that. So that's what we're hoping that we can see from this board.
If I could speak to that. With the limitations of travel, our nursing education consultants and other staff routinely went to conferences, participated in outreach regularly. However, due to the limitations in our ability to travel, that has significantly reduced our ability to conduct additional outreach to move these efforts forward.
And we would really love to do that, because we have healthcare facilities that would like for us to come out and be there and talk about the Board of Registered Nursing and our programs. Ideally, it would be nice to have a whole unit that we could do this kind of outreach, but we have minimal staff to do just the bare basics right now. And also I want to add, there is this organization that was just formed called the Men in Nursing, and I was asked to speak at that a couple of years ago. I spoke 2 years in a row to the Men in Nursing.
Ms. Bailey, I want to keep us focused on the items here, please. If we could move to issue number 6, And, I was just hearing that a lot of the issues or challenges faced by the board and their mission to move forward is because of staffing. But as you can see by the issue, the auditor has indicated that the BRN has not adequately justified the need for more staffing because they cannot prove that they are managing its current workforce adequately.
Well, the majority of the staff that we have requested is in relation to Breeze. And while we agree with what their outcome was from the audit, we believe that their evaluation of 60 files to determine what the average time frame to process an application is was not adequate information to make that assessment. We would love to be able to review all of the information in Breeze so that we could adequately determine the number of staff that we might need so we could produce workload information for that purposes. That is why we are working with the Department of Consumer Affairs Solid Group and started working with them in January and February of 2014 to map our licensing process post-Breeze Go Live. The auditor stated that this was not sufficient, so the board met again with Solid to develop a more in-depth evaluation process, and we are working collaboratively with them to map our entire licensing process from start to finish in order to evaluate the steps within the process, establish average processing timeframes to develop workload data, and entertain recommendations to improve our processes. The board submitted a budget change proposal to obtain additional staff in September 2014, but was denied because we did not have sufficient monetary resources to pay for them. The board is seeking additional funds through our regulation change, our fee audit, and a possible statutory fee change. Once the board has sufficient revenue and incorporates the workload information obtained through the Solid process, the board will submit new BCPs by September 2015 in hopes of obtaining staff resources by July 2016.
Okay. Chair Bonilla, did you have a?
Well, I mean, it's a larger issue, I guess, that seems to be cropping up in issue after issue that you've been asked to address here. And I think this is the concern that we have. And again, on page 24 of the report, it lists there's 13 suggestions that have been, given, and it doesn't seem that there's a responsiveness. And then yet you still say you have a manpower need. But here's DCA actually trying to help you become, I guess, more efficient, more standardized, better practices. And there doesn't seem to be, and a question here about the manual being updated and people not even processing forms the same way. What is your response to what is the information we've been given in the report under the staffing that seems to imply that there's a resistance to adopting better methodology?
Well, no, we definitely appreciate suggestions that are made to us to improve our processes, and we did review each of the suggestions that were provided by the department.
And did you implement those changes?
Those that, yes, if there were suggestions that were reasonable and that would increase the processing of our applications, we did implement them. However, there were some that we were unable to do based on the volume of work that we had. A suggestion had been made to regularly alphabetize our transcripts. We have thousands of transcripts in paper form. It's just not feasible at this point in time to do that. However, we are looking at other avenues as far as digitizing the transcripts so that when the transcripts come in, we can electronically scan them into the system and attach them to a record so that there isn't necessarily that need to do that. So while we do look at the suggestions, we may take the suggestion and take it to a different level and a different type of process to implement the suggestion. One of the other suggestions that was made in the paper talked about fingerprints. Our licensing managers had discussed taking fingerprints at the outset when they come in, the hard cards. And once the payment has been cashiered to the application, then the fingerprints are immediately sent to the Department of Justice for processing. We are doing that as well. So we did take into consideration all of the suggestions that were made in that memo from the Department of Consumer Affairs.
I guess a broader question over the policies and procedures is I'm sure you have procedures manuals, and are these employees following that because it seems that there's inconsistency in how the regulations are followed and how the workforce flows?
Well, I don't know that it's inconsistently followed. The manuals that are in process that were talked about in the Sunset Report and in that memo from 2005 talk about evaluating an application, which is not within the BREEZE process. It's determining whether or not an applicant meets the requirements, the educational requirements. And our staff, with no disrespect, may have had more experience and length of time in reviewing applications. And so there are certain schools that are in California that incorporate microbiology into their curriculum, and our staff knows this. And so they evaluate an application and determine, okay, they took microbiology within a certain time frame, they don't have to do a certain step, where staff from the department may not have that understanding because of the length of time that they were reviewing applications. So they might have deemed that we were doing things differently, but in our eyes, we were doing it more efficiently.
Mr. Wood? Sorry.
I'm just curious, so you're still doing fingerprint cards?
For out-of-state applicants, we have to.
Out of state? So
Yes.
there's no option for live scan for out-of-state applicants?
Not at this time. Department of Justice only accepts live scan from California if you're within California.
Okay, thank you.
Now if we could move to item number 21, issue 21, uniform substance abuse standards. I think that's a very clear question. What steps have you taken to adopt the standards that everyone else seems to have adopted?
Well, initially, the board had been under review of the uniform standards prior to the board sunsetting in December of 2011. We had initiated a regulation package that was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law in March of 2011. And unfortunately, because the board sunset on December 31st of 2011, they did not have time to enact the final package in order to send it over to Office of Administrative Law. So once we sunset, we had to have our new board reinstated and a quorum established, and we had competing priorities with handling our discipline workload and licensing individuals and reviewing educational programs. So we were unable to bring back the uniform standards until, I believe it was March of 2013, where the committee requested that the staff perform a comparison of the standards against our diversion program requirements and our probation program requirements. And so we brought that back to the committee in October of that year, and we've been reviewing the standards since then. And
Says a year and a half.
the 13,
It was October.
I'm sorry, I apologize. It may have been, was it 13 or 14?
I think it was
It may have been 14, I
14.
apologize.
It
It
was
was March of 14, so we
March
brought
of
it back in
14.
October of 14 after we had completed the comparison. And so we have gone over 8 of the standards, and we plan to go over the remaining 8 in the next 2 meetings so that we can bring a regulation package to the board meeting in September, I apologize, September of 2015, so that we can send the package to the Office of Administrative Law before the end of this year. We were also awaiting, there has been a request for an Attorney General's opinion by the Pharmacy Board, and our understanding is that opinion should be forthcoming within the next month or 2.
Of that, okay. All right, questions on that? Seeing none, we'll move to issue 16, please.
Disciplinary guidelines. Our staff was reviewing the disciplinary guidelines in 2008 and 2009 in preparation for bringing a regulation package to the board. Unfortunately, the board members were replaced by the prior governor in 2010. The BRN submitted a regulation package on March 1st of 2011 in conjunction with our uniform standards to update both the disciplinary guidelines and the uniform standards. And the package the package expired on February 28th of 2012. Our staff is reviewing the guidelines and will suggest changes to clarify existing verbiage and to incorporate the uniform standards. The BRN will present the disciplinary guideline package at the May 2015 Diversion Discipline Committee meeting and at the board's June 2015 meeting. It is anticipated the board will submit a revision to the Office of Administrative Law by the end of 2015.
Okay, one of the issues that's raised in the disciplinary guidelines is that in the background part of the analysis, talking about the one attorney practicing before BRN braced a client for a license revocation following a medication overdose, resulting in the death of a toddler.
Yes,
And BRN recommended probation for that? Was that,
the board did.
the board did? And that was when? That was the newly constituted board or the old board? That was in
When,
I believe it is the current board.
I'm sorry,
I believe it is the current board.
current board? I see. Okay,
the board makes the final decision on everything.
okay. All right. Questions at all? None, thank you.
Could you repeat that case, what you just, I'm sorry, we missed that.
This goes back, but the guidelines have not been increased. I don't know the cases.
No, you were mentioning something about a death of a toddler.
Death of a toddler?
That's correct. As a result, this is, goes back, let's see, talking about the guidelines have not been substantially updated in 13 years. As a result, practitioners note a wide variety in case outcomes. One attorney practicing before BRN braced a client for license revocation following a medication overdose resulting in the death of a toddler. BRN recommended probation for that nurse.
We can't adjudicate that, today, what the thought was.
I'm not saying you have to adjudicate it today. I'm saying that's an action that I just heard that the board.
That kind of.
I just heard that the board made that decision. That was your decision to go forward in that.
Sure we
particular
did.
case. So that was,
The dates,
thank you.
if the dates are correct,
I'm sorry?
if the dates affect this board, I'm not sure. Are you sure on the dates?
The dates, well, I was just advised by your staff that
Well, it says that there was communication by the attorney in March of 2015.
it was during the new board's tenure.
Yeah, yeah.
The case wasn't it? Was in the last few years? Okay, very good, thank you. All right, we'll move on to additional issues from the background. Issue 14, please. 2 o'clock.
The BRN has submitted budget change proposals requesting staff to conduct continuing education audits for the past 3 years. The BRN's requests have been denied. The BRN conducted regular CE and continuing education provider audits prior to 2002. Due to workload in our call center, the continuing education staff that we had was reduced to 1 and was redirected to the call center, and that 1 person was left to process continuing education provider applications and a limited number of CE and CE provider audits. There have been a number of competing priorities since 2002, including enforcement delays, development and design of BREEZE, and implementation of BREEZE in 2013. The BRN assessed our existing resources and was able to redirect a limited-term enforcement position in June 2014 to begin conducting continuing education audits. To date, this staff person has initiated 3,798 audits and referred over 160 audits to the enforcement program for action. We are now revising and refining the continuing education provider audit process and will initiate provider audits by April 1st, 2015. We will gather statistics and submit a new BCP in June 2015 to obtain additional staff to ensure we are completing a 5% audit of our licensee population.
So as you saw in the question that was raised, or the issue that was raised, is that the BRN has not provided appropriate oversight of its continuing education program, despite admonition to do so in previous reviews, and you're indicating that you're planning to give it a little more extensive.
Well, we've already established 1 position that is now fully
Looking at that.
devoted to continuing education audits, and the data that we gather from that person will be developed into a budget change proposal, again, to be able to request additional staff in support of that.
Have you ever withdrawn approval or denied an application to a GE provider, CE provider, for having committed a felony or any other offense that's substantially related to the activities of a provider?
Only if the CE provider was a registered nurse and we took action against the registered nurse license. Our CE providers are not required to be fingerprinted.
Okay. Yes.
On this issue, I guess, I understand that you have a staff person now that's going to be looking at it, but what is the basis upon their, that they're going to make their evaluations? Because the concern raised on page 33 is that it's probably not appropriate to have these CEPs promote education with little to no scientific merit. I mean, has the board taken action to let this new staff person know what the fundamental guidelines and principles and for these programs should be?
Well, our staff person that we've had historically is the person that actually approves the continuing education provider number. And that is at the point in time when they review the education of the CE provider.
No, has the board set forth standards?
The standards for CE providers are outlined in our regulations.
My regulation.
Well, but there seems to be a problem because there seems to be some that were approved that weren't very scientific.
Let me help on that. In that when a provider applies, they submit their application, they also submit a course that they are going to give. And we look at that. And if it is not scientific, that particular a course, then they would not be approved. And we would tell them, well, that course does not meet our regulations. But what happens after that, until they do produce one, we do not see every single solitary course once a provider has been approved. Ideally, that would be the way to go. But once you approve a provider and they've submitted a course, and then they may provide many courses to our licensees. We have over 3,000 providers. And ideally, it would be great to have a unit whereby we could look at all of the courses or randomly look at these courses.
Well, I mean, maybe
yeah.
an easier way to
Yeah.
approach it would be to simply say none of the CEP providers, or credit would not be given for courses that don't have a scientific basis.